This video has two simple messages. Super Mario Kart is the greatest game in the series, and Mario Kart 64 sucks massive balls. And if that one makes you kinda mad, then guess what? You're in exactly the right place. If that makes you think I've lost my mind, because Mario Kart 64 is obviously a seminal title in a great series that defined the N64 and defined Mario Kart and defined your childhood and defined your early memories of happiness, then this video's for you, because you're wrong. And your very wrongness makes this video essential, because it tells us that Mario Kart 64 has deluded generations of gamers. Its gameplay is weak, its design is shoddy, its ideas are poor, and frankly, it's the weak link in a glorious gaming dynasty. And yet somehow, this ball-sucking fun vacuum has got away with the greatest crime in gaming. It's made people forget Super Mario Kart, because that is the seminal title that defined this great series, that laid the foundation, that had the best gameplay, the iconic design, the best ideas. It's better than DS. It's better than Double Dash. It's better than Mario Kart 8. And we want you to play it. We want all of you to play it. So here's the deal. Let's settle this once and for all. We're the kart off. Super Mario Kart versus Mario Kart 64. A fight for destiny. A fight for legacy. Because we'll not only show why SNK kicks 64's mix of pre-rendered dirge and sludgy textured ass, we'll prove that Mario Kart 64 sucks balls. And if we're right, you go play Super Mario Kart this instant. If we're right, you get on socials and tell the world. If we're right, you sacrificially bury your copy of Mario Kart 64 in a specially built pit. And if we're wrong, well, you can tell us our fate in the comments below. Deal? Then let's begin. Now, a kart off is a simple thing. Compare what's important, and for these two, the test bed is clear. Make a contribution to the series, have the best course design, have the best gameplay mechanics, steering, drifting, jumping, boosting, nail the look, be a treat for the eyes, show off your system, but most of all, the critical, essential thing, be fun. That's the test. Mario Kart games do all those things. It's why they're some of the most amazing games on every Nintendo console they've touched. But the defining thing, the essential thing, is always fun. So, all that being said, I think it's time to race. Let's start with SMK's biggest triumph and 64's biggest letdown, the mechanics. See, Super Mario Kart came out with a game in blue. In the early 90s, racers were mostly dodging left and right. Super Monaco, Outrun, Lotus Turbo Challenge, you know the drill. There was no 3D, and even the sprite scaling magic of Sega's arcades could offer a little more to track design than pretty scenery and tricky obstacles and making it run at a right old clip. They did it very well, but eventually, those corners feel the same. That cornering feels the same. It reduces the difference between good mechanics and bad mechanics down to something quite basic. To responsiveness, accuracy, and how the car behaves when going faster or slower around the same corner. Mode 7 changed all that. Mode 7 gave us handling. When the track goes in any direction it pleases, corners and loops and jumps, suddenly it matters how the game behaves, it matters how your kart moves. Suddenly you can feel the car sliding in the dust, you can feel the grip bite on the asphalt, you can feel the G-force dragging your sprite round the parabola, and if you can feel it, you can harness it. Super Mario Kart perfected the power slide. Every corner was an opportunity for rubber burning, sand spitting, gravity defying aggression, for power pinned by control, balancing speed and line, daring the kart to take ever tighter angles, ever narrower gaps, ever finer margins. Super Mario Kart perfected the kart control. No understeer, no lag. Every tap of the D-pad met with an instant success or failure on screen. The karts are vicious little vipers, darting and stabbing at the track, and you know that what works is down to you, and what fails is down to you. The game drives pure. It is the most distilled, perfected, honed kart experience there has ever been, and we loved it. And then they made Mario Kart 64. 64 doesn't handle like a kart game should. The controls are snaky and understeered. The wheels slip about and rob you of that close control. You wonder at every corner whether it will behave the way you need, the way you're driving it. But 64 doesn't ditch the power slide. Hell, in truth, it takes it further, rewarding adventure with mini boosts and encouraging you to be more daring, be more bold, to stretch out the curve and stress out the tyres. The idea is brilliant. The execution is terrible. 64's Power Slide is a long, meandering detour of a move. It's the game equivalent of walking a bit fast as you go down a slightly bendy corridor. Its core feature isn't precision and daring and thrilling racing on the edge. Its core feature is that it goes on for a bit. The most satisfying slide on 64 is a long, banking curve that charges a boost, hits an apex, and resumes on the right line with a little fart of extra speed. Oh my god, that's dull! Super Mario Kart does all of those things in every corner of every track, sometimes multiple times per corner. There are whole courses on Super you can complete in the time it takes to finish one of 64's blathering, flustering slides. Of course, 64 does add a little trick to the series with the mini boost, and there is a certain satisfaction to it that Super doesn't have, but the truth is 64 doesn't even land that very well, and to explain why, we gotta move to the next and maybe most important difference: the track design. See, all that hyperbole I just loaded onto the SNES game only really lands if the course is right. Handling only matters when cornering matters. So your tracks have to throw the right challenges at you if you want the thrill of besting them. And Super Mario Kart wrote the book on track design. Short corners, blind corners, tight chicanes, narrow lanes, right angles, hairpins, loops, jumps, rough edges, cliff edges, and all of it balanced on the head of a pin. Because every track was tight. Every track was a compact, concise, condensed essence of a course, throwing one bend after another, one idea after another, in a quick-fire succession of racing that just never lets it drop. You simply will not find an inch of track in Super Mario Kart that isn't doing something to make your brain work. It is utterly perfect. And then they made Mario Kart 64. And before I say another word, let's address that big, sludgy, polygonal elephant in the room. 64 is a fascinating, kind of groundbreaking title that genuinely did new things with 3D in home consoles. It was the zeitgeist. It was the future. It was a technical feat that stuck with gamers for decades since. And it ruined the courses. See, 3D wants a big, grand vista. I mean, if you did keep the tiny tracks from the SNES, there'd be nothing to see in 3D. 3D opens up your world and lets you roam and gives you space for new ideas and new mechanics. So when you take a game 3D, you naturally take a game big. But for Mario Kart 64, big means loose, flabby, flaccid. 64's courses are full of big banking curves, long yawning straight, wide tracks, really wide tracks. There's no drama, no immediacy. The edge of the course is such an unbelievable distance away that the defining benefit of 3D, that accurate representation of speed, is completely and utterly lost. Taking one of those huge corners on those huge tracks in 64 feels like learning to drive in a huge empty field, or playing ping pong on a full-size tennis court, or playing snooker with a beach ball in a huge bendy foamy noodle thing. It's so utterly drained of drama, it hurts. There is technically a skill to it, but it's the satisfaction equivalent of throwing a damp sock into a laundry basket. It just doesn't matter. And those straights, oh my god, there are stretches of road in Mario Kart 64 that go straight for, I don't know, a year? I mean, it's more like 10 seconds. Yeah, I timed it by the way. But by God, in gaming terms, 10 seconds is a lifetime. Seriously, count to 10. It's ages.
He chose poorly.
If you're out front, no one jostling, no one to shoot, no one to overtake, you are literally just moving forwards. That's it. There's no other enjoyment for those 10 seconds except for wondering if you can guess the exact moment of your death. The thing is, the N64 was in an awkward position. On the one hand, it didn't have the grunt of the GameCube or the Wii or the Switch that would go on to do 3D with such brilliance. It just couldn't twist and bend the landscape in the way those games would go on to do, so it couldn't recreate in 3D the thrill of a brilliantly poised course in 2D, because it was just too complex. But on the other hand, it also couldn't have stayed 2D. That is the one mercy you have to grant Nintendo when they made 64. They had to try it. They had to make the jump. They had to show their machine had the chops. But unlike, say, PlayStation's Gran Turismo or Saturn's Sega Rally, they They couldn't follow a template for how to make their game behave in a 3D world. Those games could semi-mimic a realistic environment and translate it to a game. It's not easy, right? But it's a start. Mario Kart lives in a big, no-rules cartoon world, and there was simply no template for that. So they made one, and they went broad and big and expansive and long, and for me that was impossible to reconcile with the Mario Kart dynamic of speed and craziness and constant thrilling action. That track design makes me want to cry. Which begs an obvious question: was it at least worth it graphically? 64 was a true 3D game, landing in an era obsessed with the switch to polygons, and it gave Nintendo the chance to show how its colourful, kid-friendly style could make the transition to the grown-up world of late 90s gaming. And it was a proper statement title for N64. It launched early alongside Mario 64 to show what their system had to offer, and it was right in that period where the machine needed to prove it was the powerhouse Nintendo were promising. For both those reasons, it was crucial it looked impressive. So did it deliver? Well, yeah and no. It was big graphically, and it was tidy graphically. It had clean lines, it had a decent frame rate. Certain sections of it did look cracking, with tunnels and arches and banks and jumps all playing with the Z-axis in a way that was truly new for the generation, and it gave teasing glimpses of how fun that new style could be, and it landed some heavy blows on the competition, because gamers had seen the Saturn struggle with the Daytona port and struggle with transparencies and all those other gaming turf war battle lines, whereas PlayStation was still a way off Gran Turismo and those true 3D powerhouses. Ridge Racer was the true competition at this time, and it is in truth another incredibly dull looking game, so at least Mario Kart had a bit of playfulness to have a hang over its head. So first impressions graphically were good, but even back then Mario Kart 64's graphics weren't a slam dunk. Those pre-rendered racers, they looked cheap and rough and lifeless. The textures were hit and miss. The brighter, more colourful courses looked fresh and clean, but the others looked sludgy and dull. And everywhere you looked, the cartridge memory limitations showed up with a repetitive architecture and low-res, blurry images. The key thing here is that it's a big claim of Mario Kart 64's defenders that it's a classic because it's the one that made the jump to 3D. So it wowed everyone at the time with some technical tour de force, and it's revisionist of anyone like me to criticise the graphics 20 odd years later, but the truth is more prosaic than that. It was, I'm not denying it, great to see a new style, and N64 was a fascinating beast that did 3D with a greater depth and style and scale than some of its rivals, and it was a big bit of history to see games moving into the 3D space. It was exciting and it was important, but important doesn't make it good, and it didn't back then either. No one was blind to those sludgy, dirgy textures. Plenty of people criticised those dodgy pre-rendered sprites, and I was less than impressed with those 3D worlds. For me, the whole thing always just looked flat, insipid, boring. Super Mario Kart broke ground in other ways. Mode 7 was SNES's greatest party trick, and in those days before full 3D, it was a major coup for Nintendo, and we knew it was a trick, but it was a bloody good one. And Super Mario Kart sang with a simple cartoon colour, hand-drawn, pixel perfect, full of character and charm and joy. This was Nintendo at its playful, cutesy best, and you know, no one can deny that that game is showing its age, and no one can deny it strains the eyes a little bit now, but no one can deny its charm either. So shall we talk legacy? Because if my central whinge is that Super Mario Kart is being sorely overlooked, then I've got to confront a harsh reality. Maybe it's being overlooked because Mario Kart 64 is just more important. Maybe people remember 64 as the game changer because it was. Maybe Super Mario Kart is a great game, but 64 is greater. Maybe I'm just wrong. Well, maybe. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, maybe gameplay's in the hands of the gamer. But history and legacy, they're more objective things than that, right? Just let me advance the theory, right? Mario Kart 64 got lucky. And it goes like this. It wasn't better than Super Mario Kart, but it was new. It was 3D. It landed just as a new generation picked up a joypad, and It became a big fish in a small pond. Go with me, right? In the mid-90s, there was an incredibly strong narrative driving game production. 3D was cool, 2D was for kids. 3D was the cutting edge. And along came PlayStation with its brilliant marketing, inch-perfect market positioning, and market-changing titles like Wipeout and Tomb Raider and Crash Bandicoot, and later on Gran Turismo and Metal Gear and all of that, and all of it in glorious polygons. Everything Sony and PlayStation did furthered that narrative, and 3D became inextricably linked with the best titles, with the coolest system, with the new market they created of older savvy gamers. Even before N64 and its sludgy lumbering kart game came along, the SNES and its rainbow era 2D were fading into a sprite-laden background. By 1996, Super Mario Kart was already seriously out of fashion. And so, when along comes the N64, Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64 and shoves Nintendo into the new 3D world, it had the ultimate newness bias. 64 wasn't just the new game in the franchise, it was on the new platform, it was in the new style, it was the new world. And with the gaming landscape so firmly in 3D's thrall, you just couldn't have a foot in both camps. And this was an effect confirmed and locked in for a generation. It's not everyone, because a lot of people watching this will have lived through the whole time. They'll have a love for 2D and 3D, and all of this will seem like selective, narrow-minded hogwash. I get it, but they're not the people who I mean. What this period in time did was it didn't just change gamers, it created gamers. It created gamers by throwing the net so much wider than it had been in the early 90s. And this generation of gamers saw a sudden huge influx of new recruits who only ever knew 3D as king. And specifically for this argument, these are gamers who only ever knew Mario Kart in 3D as king. Take all of that, the perfect timing, the newness bias, the generational shift that nearly locked out 2D altogether, and Mario Kart 64 has got things pretty much sewn up without lifting a sludgy graphical finger. But what comes next is even more potent. It became kind of cult. See, two things we know about the N64. One, it's got a lot of flack in the last 2 decades, so much so the narrative's kind of twisted and hardened into two binary camps, either those who write it off as a Nintendo misstep, or those who think it's a glorious anomaly and they become die-hard fans. And two, the N64 didn't have the world's biggest library. Add those together and you've got a die-hard loyalty centering around a small cabal of games, a kind of focused adoration that solidified and glorified the love of N64's best titles. In short, yes, Mario Kart 64 might have a big fanbase, but at its heart, it's got a bit of a cult fanbase. And a cult tends to have a ripple effect on everyone else. When there's such intense love around the game, unless you're actively going to fight it, you kind of do start believing it. So there you go, that's my theory. Mario Kart 64 rode in at the right time to get plaudits way beyond its quality by virtue of hitting the zeitgeist. And then it found itself on the inside of some kind of enduring N64 loving that's put a hardened shell of retro nostalgia around the machine's core of okay games. It got lucky. What does all that tell us about its legacy? Well, here's where I have to be an objective, open-minded reviewer for once. I might think Mario Kart 64 is a horrendous, overpraised mess, but I do recognise its impact. It's left a lot of people with fond memories, somehow, of Mario Kart, and somehow there is a genuine thread from 64 into the rest of the series. They did quickly outstrip it. They left it behind, but there's no denying there is 64-shaped DNA in the rest of the games. So yes, begrudgingly, 64 has had a lasting impact. But I'll tell you this, don't overplay that. The game that started it all was Super Mario Kart, not 64. As the series has progressed, it hasn't really built on the ideas from 64. The odd bit has sneaked through iterations, but the franchise has generally, gradually shaken them off. You can see an evolution through Double Dash, DS and Wii that culminates in a near perfection in Mario Kart 8. But at that endpoint, although that evolution leads you to somewhere that is decidedly 3D, and at first glance seems like surely it comes from the mid-90s, not the early 90s, it undoubtedly owes more to its 2D SNES origins than the 64-bit anomaly. In the modern game, the power slide has got firmer and nimbler. There's none of the empty drifting that characterised the N64 version, and all of the precision and speed of Super Mario Kart is what you see. The control has returned to the player. There's no loose, understeered handling mimicking kart action instead of nailing it. If Mario Kart as an idea is built on immediacy, then the games that bookend the series share a vision of its gameplay. And in the modern game, the 3D tracks have got smarter and more intricate. Corners have got quick and short. The structure is challenging with constant, thrilling, overlapping ideas. None of that open, featureless corridors punctuated by limp curves and meagre thrills. If Super Mario Kart could transform into 3D, Mario Kart 8 is what it would look like. If you don't believe me, go play them. Go play all of them, but particularly play Mario Kart 64, and as you're pootling around another mind-numbing eon of a bend and another faceless, soulless track, you honestly challenge yourself if that feels the tiniest, slightest bit like Mario Kart 8. You honestly ask if the modern Mario Kart owes anything to that bloated yawn of a game. It might not look like Super Mario Kart, but the modern game is built on it, on its vivid idea of what makes a race game tick, on the electricity of Super Mario Kart's track design that's wrought from drama and challenge and thrill, on its precision, control, fluidity, speed. These are the traits of SMK. This is its DNA. This is its blueprint for a kart game, re-emerging through the generations. This is Super Mario Kart's legacy, re-emerging from the long shadow of its cumbersome, hulking sequel. If the evolution of the franchise, if the perfection of the franchise has a message about legacy, then it surely is simply this: Super Mario Kart is the greatest game in the series, and Mario Kart 64 sucks massive balls.